The sun had just risen over the golden grass fields of the Masai Mara Nature Reserve in Kenya. In the soft, sparkling light of dawn, a mother lion and her playful cub strolled through the dry grass. A gentle morning breeze swept across the plains, bending the tall blades of grass and revealing faint footprints, remnants of a pride that had moved on long ago. These two lions now lived apart from the main pride. The mother had made a choice to raise her cub away from the group so she could teach him how to survive and become a brave, capable hunter. The cub was still quite young, full of energy, and always running off in different directions, his curiosity about the world seemingly endless. Every morning, the mother lion led her cub on walks through the vast fields to practice stalking prey. The grass was thick and dry, creating a landscape that was both wild and challenging. As they moved quietly, the mother would often nudge her cub gently with her nose, reminding him to stay silent, to listen, to feel. But the cub struggled to focus. His bright eyes were constantly darting around, fascinated by every rustle, shadow, and movement. That particular morning, they arrived at a part of the grassland they hadn't explored before. As they wandered through this unfamiliar area, the cub noticed something strange, a dark opening in the ground. Curious as ever, he crept closer to investigate, sniffing around the edge to see what might be inside. But the ground was loose and unstable. Suddenly, the cub lost his footing and tumbled into the deep hole. A sharp, terrified cry pierced the still morning air. The mother lion whipped around in alarm, instantly sprinting back toward the sound. She reached the hole and looked down to find her cub struggling desperately at the bottom. Letting out a roar filled with panic, she paced along the edge, clearly torn, wanting to leap in after him but knowing she might not be able to climb. Back out. Desperately, she circled the hole, trying every angle, every possible way to help, but it was no use. The walls were steep, the soil dry and packed. The cub couldn't get a grip, and every time he clawed at the wall, more dirt crumbled and slid back down. Exhausted and scared, the cub's cries started to fade. His tiny body grew weak, and eventually he collapsed, panting heavily. Above him, the mother lion growled low, full of pain and desperation, calling out to her cub again and again, her eyes wide with fear. Realizing there was nothing more she could do on her own, the mother lion finally stepped away from the hole. She looked back once more at her fading cub, then turned and began to run. Her only hope now was to find help. Crossing the grassland with determined strides, she made her way toward a large asphalt road that led to the reserve. In the distance, she spotted a slow-moving convoy of tourist vehicles. Without hesitation, the lion ran directly into the road, blocking their path. The lead driver slammed on the brakes as the powerful animal appeared out of nowhere. The vehicle stopped, and a man stepped out, looking completely stunned. His name was David, a veteran ranger who had worked at the Masai Mara Reserve for years. He was currently guiding a group of tourists through the plains, explaining the terrain and the wildlife they encountered. At first, the group inside the cars panicked at the sight of the lion blocking the road. But David, with his trained eye, quickly realized something was different. This lion didn't look aggressive. She wasn't stalking or preparing to charge. He stepped forward slowly, carefully, making sure not to startle her. The lion met his gaze with eyes that were full of urgency, pleading almost. She let out a low, hoarse roar. The tourists, now deeply intrigued, stepped out of their vehicles too, keeping their distance as they watched the interaction unfold. Then something extraordinary happened. The mother lion stepped up to David and gently rubbed her head against him, almost like a house cat begging for help. She groaned again, looked out toward the grasslands, then turned back to him with a desperate look. That's when David noticed something that made him pause. A scar, just beneath her neck. And in that instant, he knew exactly who she was. 2 years ago, During one of the worst droughts the region had ever seen, more than 500 wild animals had perished. David had been out on patrol when he found a lion in terrible shape, starving, dehydrated, and barely clinging to life. He brought her back to the station, gave her water, treated her wounds, and nursed her back to health. Once she recovered, he released her back into the wild. The scar was still there, a silent reminder of that awful time. Now, here she was, coming back to him, trusting him, asking him for help once again. David gently placed a hand on her thick mane, reading the desperation in her eyes. He turned to the tourists and explained what was happening, asking them to stay calm and wait. Then, without another moment's hesitation, the mother lion turned and took off across the plains. David signaled to a few of the tourists who wanted to follow, and together, keeping a respectful distance, they began trailing her across the field. The wind carried a faint, heartbreaking sound, the weak, broken cries of the lion cub, still trapped and growing weaker by the minute. The cries pushed them all to move faster. After trekking more than 1.5 kilometers across the dry, uneven terrain, they finally reached the hole. The cub was still there, barely moving, lying flat at the bottom and breathing shallowly. The mother lion stood right at the edge, growling with distress as she watched her cub cling to life. David knelt beside the pit, heart pounding. He knew time was running out, and he had to act fast. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a soft golden glow over the vast plains, David and the group of tourists began their slow walk back to the vehicles. The ground beneath their feet was warm now, the scent of dry grass mixing with the crisp morning air. Behind them, the lioness and her cub had vanished into the tall savanna, but their presence still lingered, like an echo in the wind. The tourists walked in silence for a while, each lost in their thoughts, touched in different ways by what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just a wildlife encounter. It was a moment of raw emotion, an experience that cut through the usual thrill of safari and touched something much deeper. One of the guests, a young woman with tears still shining in her eyes, finally spoke. "I've never seen anything like that before." It was like she knew who David was, like she came back because she trusted him. David, walking just ahead, turned and gave a quiet nod. Animals remember more than we give them credit for, and sometimes, when the wild calls for help, we're lucky enough to be close enough to answer. Back at the vehicle, the group loaded in, still buzzing with excitement and gratitude. Cameras were checked, photos reviewed, many showing that unforgettable image of the lion cub rising from the pit and the moment of reunion between mother and child. The convoy rolled forward again, now moving slowly through the warm air that shimmered above the road. David kept glancing back toward the direction the lions had disappeared, wondering how far they would go before resting again. He couldn't help but feel a quiet connection, something ancient and unspoken, that bound him to that lioness. As they drove, David shared more about the nature of lion prides, how lionesses often break away when training cubs, and how incredibly rare it was for one to seek help from a human. The guests listened intently, eyes wide, minds still replaying the drama of the morning. One tourist asked, "Do you think the cub will survive out there?" David smiled. "After today, I think that little one has a fighting chance, and he's got a mother who'd cross the world to save him. That's more than most could ask for." Eventually, the vehicles reached a shaded lookout point where they could rest. Some tourists journaled, others just sat quietly, staring out across the endless land. The silence of the savannah held a new meaning now, not emptiness, but possibility. Life, danger, survival, and sometimes unexpected kindness. Back at the reserve station later that evening, David sat alone for a while, looking over the photos that had been sent to him by some of the guests. In every frame, the lions looked majestic, timeless, especially the one where the mother was pressing her head into his side, a moment of trust so rare it almost didn't seem real. He printed that one, pinned it up on the wall beside the old photo of her from 2 years ago, skinny, injured, but alive thanks to a chance meeting. The past and the present, side by side. Outside, night had begun to fall. The Masai Mara glowed under the soft orange light of dusk. Somewhere out there, the lioness and her cub were huddled together beneath a tree, resting before another day of hunting and learning. And though David couldn't see them anymore, he knew they were out there, alive, together, and safe. And so, dear friend, thank you again for being part of this journey. Nature has its own way of telling stories, stories of courage, of love, of survival, and of the mysterious bond that sometimes forms between wild animals and humans. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing it with others who love the wonders of the wild. Because out there, in the heart of Africa, under the golden skies of Kenya, stories like this are happening every day. And we can't wait to tell you the next one.